I found the box 3 days after my husband Frank's funeral, tucked beneath his workbench under a dusty coil of copper wire and a coffee can full of deck screws. It was small, rusted at the corners, and sealed with a cheap padlock that looked older than I am. Inside were the blueprints for a tiny home he had drawn by hand on vellum, the ink faded to a soft sepia, and a single line of his handwriting on the back page of his pocket ledger that read, "Do not trust them, Mara. Save yourself." I didn't know it then, but that box would unravel a $500,000 fraud, put my own daughter and son-in-law in handcuffs, and ultimately give me back my company, my dream home, and a brand called Small Lies Tiny Homes, where Marcus now spends his Saturdays in a pink shirt that says, "Built on Deceit," tightening every last screw on the display models while a live camera streams it to anyone who wants to watch. My name is Mara. I'm 55, and I spent 30 years as a Finnish carpenter. I could read a plank of maple the way a surgeon reads a scan, seeing where the grain would splinter before it ever touched a blade. I knew the pitch of a blade by the sound it made on a table saw. I once restored a 110-year-old staircase in an Edwardian house, matching every hand-cut riser so perfectly that the new wood vanished into the old like a secret. That skill, the ability to spot a hidden flaw, to feel when something wasn't true, is what saved my life. But back then, a year ago, all I knew was loss. Frank was the quiet architect of everything. He never spoke much, but he sketched homes that hugged the land like they had always been there, porches angled to catch the morning light, roof lines that followed the slope of hills. One night, after I'd emptied my entire 401k, $100,000 of my own savings accrued over 3 decades, to co-found a tiny home construction company with my son-in-law, Frank set down his pencil and said, "Every nail holds a truth, Mara. But people, they bury theirs in wood and paperwork." I squeezed his hand, not understanding that he was handing me a warning I would need sooner than I could imagine. He knew something I didn't. He'd seen the stress Marcus carried the wrong way, like a man who owes money to the wrong people, and he'd started building a countermeasure I wouldn't discover until the vultures were already circling. Frank died of a massive heart attack on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday noon, my daughter Jenna and her husband Marcus were in my living room, wearing funeral blacks that still had the department store creases. Jenna dabbed at dry eyes with a Kleenex she never actually used. Marcus didn't bother with tissues. His watch was too shiny, a heavy silver diver's watch that he kept adjusting, and his tone was already switched over to what he called estate logistics. While I sat hollowed out on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket that still smelled faintly of Frank's pipe tobacco, they moved through his workshop as if they were appraising a foreclosure. Marcus picked up a battered metal box from under the workbench, rattled it, and said, "Junk, we'll donate this whole pile." He dropped it into a cardboard box labeled Goodwill without opening it, then turned to Jenna and murmured something about a signature schedule that he needed by Monday. I sat there, stitched to the cushion by grief, but some old part of my brain flagged that drop. Marcus never let anything with metal corners go into a donation bin without checking for value first. The way he discarded it was too fast, too dismissive, like he was clearing a path, not clearing junk. I retrieved the box that evening after they left. The padlock looked old, a cheap master lock with a brass face that had tarnished to green. But Frank kept a single filed-down key tucked inside the hollow leg of his drafting stool, a spot only I knew because I'd watched him tuck his spare studio key there a dozen times after locking himself out. My fingers found it in the dark, the metal cold and familiar. I opened the box alone, under the flicker of the shop's fluorescent light. Inside, rolled tight and tied with cotton string, were the original Incon vellum blueprints for the prototype tiny home we had spent a year designing. This was the one with the custom folding staircase that could tuck into the wall using a gravity-assisted hinge I'd machined myself. The passive solar angles I had calculated down to the degree using sun path charts Frank had taped to the window. The vellum still smelled of his drawing ink. And wedged beside the scroll was a thin pocket ledger, the black faux leather kind he carried for years, the one with the elastic band that had gone slack from use. I flipped to the last filled page. His pencil strokes were faint but steady, the handwriting of a man who knew his time was short and every word had to count. "Do not trust them, Mara. Save yourself. The company structure is a trap. See Locke and Associates, Suite 204, Redford Tower." And then, smaller, almost a secret afterthought, scribbled in the margin as if he'd added it after a sleepless night. I built a back door. You are the key. A cold clarity cut through the fog of grief, the way a sharp chisel finds the exact line it needs to follow. I slid the box behind a loose baseboard in the shop, wedged it behind the old cast-iron radiator that Frank had salvaged from a church demolition, and placed a stack of paint cans in front of it. I memorized the address, ran it through my mind 3 times until it felt like a rhyme, and walked back into my house, where I could already hear Marcus's car pulling into the driveway again, gravel crunching under those expensive tires. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a handshake still means something in a world of forged signatures. The next morning, before the fog had even burned off the lawn, Marcus and Jenna sat me down at my own kitchen table. They had a stack of documents from a folder embossed with a law firm logo I had never seen, something called Wexford and Crane in gold foil. Marcus folded his hands like a grief counselor on a daytime talk show, his knuckles white under the pressure. Mara, we are so worried about you. All this stress managing Frank's affairs, the business, the prototype that's half built. You're not thinking clearly. The best thing, the only safe thing, is for you to sign over your 40% of Tiny Truth homes to us just temporarily. We'll take care of everything. You can live in the model home, free. No bills, no worries. Jenna nodded, mouth pressed into a tight, sympathetic line that I'd seen her practice in the mirror when she was a teenager trying to look contrite. Mom, you've done so much for us. Let us do this for you now. I could see the shape of the scam. They assumed grief had hollowed me out, made me easy to steer like a boat with no rudder. A week earlier, before I'd found Frank's ledger, I might have signed. But I had his words burning in my mind now, the graphite from that pencil stroke almost a physical weight in my chest. I let my shoulders sag. I blinked slowly like a woman underwater, let my gaze drift toward the window. I just can't think about papers right now, I whispered, my voice thin and reedy. My head's so foggy. Maybe next week. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. I watched his left hand clench under the table, a quick flex of tendons that he thought I couldn't see. He recovered with a pat on my hand that landed too hard. We just want you to be comfortable. Why don't you come stay with us? We'll look after you. No stairs, no maintenance, no reminders of everything you've lost. I knew exactly what that was. A controlled environment where every phone call and visitor passed through their filter, where they could monitor my mail, my mood, my proximity to the truth. But I agreed. It would put me inside their house, inside their lives, inside the very center of their operation. I packed a small bag, a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, and my old tool roll wrapped in a flannel shirt. Marcus raised an eyebrow at the tools, and I murmured something about Frank wanting me to tighten the hinges on a cabinet he'd built for their laundry room. The lie landed like a finished joint, seamless. I left the metal box hidden in the shop and moved into their guest room the same day. The guest room was decorated in shades of beige and remorse. A small window faced the backyard, where I could see the patio and the grill, Marcus's domain for his confidential phone calls. For the first week, I played the role of the fragile widow. I napped. I watched cooking shows with the volume low. I let Jenna bring me soup on a tray and didn't comment when the soup was from a can. I shuffled around in slippers and let my voice flutter. And all the while, I cataloged every detail like I was reading grain. The way Marcus took calls on the back patio, his voice a tight, angry whisper that cut through the glass. The word closing came up often. Then clean title. Then, she'll sign, I'll make her sign. A phrase that landed in my stomach like a stone. The way Jenna would open a laptop and close it the moment I entered the kitchen, the screen reflecting a spreadsheet with columns of numbers bleeding red. The way a certified letter arrived and Marcus tore it open in the garage, then slammed a fist against the workbench before he thought I could hear. The way their spending accelerated, a feverish rush of consumption that screamed of borrowed time. Their spending was the first real red flag. They had always liked nice things, but now it was a cascade. A new SUV appeared in the driveway, a $60,000 German model with temporary plates still taped to the rear window. Catered dinners came in cardboard boxes with gold foil, 3 times a week, the remains thrown out with the lobster shells still smelling sweet. Marcus bought a carbon fiber road bike that he leaned against the wall still in its plastic wrap, a $7,000 machine he didn't even know how to ride. He installed a wine fridge with a glass front, stocked it with bottles that had French labels, and then asked me how to program the temperature because the manual was too complicated. They were living on future money, Money that was supposed to be mine. Money that represented every hour I'd spent bent over a planer, my 400 one. K emptied like a change jar. I began to move at night. The house had a layout I learned in 3 days. Marcus's home office, converted from a formal dining room, had a cherrywood desk and a steel filing cabinet with a keyed lock, a 4-drawer Hahn model from the 1980s with a simple wafer lock. One afternoon, a plumbing leak in the guest bathroom gave me my cover. I went under the sink with a basin wrench from my old tool roll, which I had brought along in my overnight bag with a vague excuse about comfort. The leak was a corroded gasket on the cold water shutoff valve, a 10-minute fix for anyone who'd ever worked a job site. I disassembled the valve body, scraped the old rubber off with a utility knife, and cut a new gasket from a sheet of neoprene I'd kept in the bottom of my roll for years. I repacked the stem with graphite cord, tightened the bonnet nut, and cleaned the trap while Jenna stood in the doorway wringing her hands, utterly helpless. "How did you even know how to do that?" she asked, genuinely surprised as if competence was a foreign language. I just smiled, patting the chrome pipe like I was thanking it for behaving. Old skills die hard. That image stuck. Harmless, handy old mom who could fix a faucet and keep a fern alive. It meant they never saw me as a threat. It meant Marcus left his office door unlocked when he stepped out for a call. The next step was the trash. Tuesdays were collection days, so Monday nights I volunteered to wheel the bins to the curb. I separated their office bag before I did, lifting it out of the kitchen bin and carrying it, seemingly casually, to the garage where I claimed I needed to find a replacement bulb for the porch light. Inside, under the single bare bulb, I untied the bag and pulled out a tangled nest of shredded paper, cross-cut strips from a standard office shredder. Back in my room, I spread the strips on the bedspread like a puzzle, using tweezers from my toiletry kit to handle the delicate edges. It took 3 hours, hunched under the dim light with my back aching, but I reconstructed enough to see a document titled Assignment and Release of Equity Interest, dated 3 weeks before Frank died, bearing what was supposed to be my signature. It was a forgery, but a good one. They had practiced my loops, the distinctive way I cross my T's with a small upward flick, the pressure-heavy descender on my Y. Below it, a fax cover sheet from a commercial real estate title company, referencing a pending purchase agreement for Tiny Truth Homes, including all physical assets, pending patents, and the model home itself, a price of $750,000. The buyer was a development firm called Ashford Group, which planned to franchise the tiny home designs across 3 states. $750,000. They had taken my $100,000, my designs, my labor, my sweat in the sawdust, and they were selling it all out from under me for a price that would never touch my hands. And they had the nerve to hand me a $6,000 settlement, which I'd later find in a separate folder labeled buyout offer, and call it generous, like I was being done a favor. The original forged release was almost certainly in that locked filing cabinet. I needed to get inside. I had never broken into anything in my life, but 30 years on job sites teach you things the white-collar world assumes you'll never know. Early in my career, I apprenticed with a cabite maker named Ruddy, a man who stored his chisels in a vintage steel file cabinet and lost the key every other week. He'd pop the lock with a piece of spring steel and a tension wrench in under 10 seconds, the motion as casual as turning a doorknob. The memory of his hands stayed with me, the way he'd insert the tension bar and just listen, his head tilted, feeling for the binding tumbler. I fashioned a short hook from a heavy-duty hairpin I'd found in Jenna's bathroom, filing the tip against the rough concrete floor of the garage until it was thin and slightly curved. A flat tension bar I cut from the metal spine of an old windshield wiper I found in Marcus's automotive junk drawer, using a hacksaw blade from my tool roll. I practiced on a similar lock in the garage, an old file box they used for garden tools, feeling the way the wafers bind under torque, learning the delicate pressure until I could do it by touch alone. That night, when the house was silent save for the hum of the HVAC and the distant gurgle of the ice maker, I knelt by the filing cabinet, slid the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied gentle clockwise torque, and used the hook to rake the wafer tumblers one by one. The third pin set with a soft click that I felt through my fingertips, and the cylinder turned as smoothly as a bearing. I pulled the drawer open, the quiet squeak of the rollers swallowed by the carpet. Inside, I found a hanging folder labeled transfer. It contained the original release with my forged signature, notarized by a notary named Deborah Simpkins, whose license I later learned had been suspended 6 months prior for stamping documents without proper witness. I photographed every page with my phone, moving the document into a pool of light from the window so the shadows would catch the indentations of the pen strokes, proving the signature was traced rather than written naturally. Deeper in the drawer was a thick binder with a logo for an offshore limited liability company called Haven Holdings, registered in Belize. The sole listed director was Marcus, and the mailing address was a P.O. box in Belize City. The binder showed a loan agreement for $200,000 secured against the future sale of tiny truth homes, using the company's assets as collateral without my signature or knowledge. The loan had been issued by a private lender named Trident Capital, with an interest rate that verged on loan sharking. Marcus had already defaulted on the first 2 payments, and the loan included an acceleration clause that would trigger immediate repayment of the full principal plus penalties if the sale didn't close within 60 days. He was drowning, and my signature was the only life raft he could steal. But holding proof and stopping a moving train are different things. I needed to understand the backdoor Frank mentioned, the one that would turn the lock against the thieves. The next morning, I told Jenna I had a follow-up doctor appointment for my blood pressure, a lie that required no paperwork, and I drove my old pickup to Redford Tower, a building of glass and polished concrete downtown. Suite 204. The door read, Locke and Associates, Trust and Estate Law. Ellen Locke was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair that swooped like a hawk's wing, eyes that missed nothing, and a desk that was a model of organized chaos. When I said Frank's name, she leaned back and folded her hands on a legal pad covered in meticulous notes. I was wondering when you'd come. Your husband was a careful man, Mrs. Calder. He anticipated exactly this moment. He came to me 8 months ago, sat in that chair you're in, and he said, my son-in-law is going to try to steal my wife's company. I need to build a lock he can't pick. She opened a file drawer and laid out the mechanism Frank had built. It was a work of quiet genius. Frank had examined the corporate structure Marcus had set up, the one that gave Marcus 60% controlling interest and me 40% as a passive minority. Marcus thought that gave him the power to sell, liquidate, restructure at will. But Frank had noticed that the intellectual property, the actual blueprints, the custom stair mechanism, the name Tiny Truth Homes, and the foundational engineering calculations, those had never been formally assigned to the operating company. Marcus, in his rush to set up the LLC, had used boilerplate templates and had left the IP in limbo. Frank, with Ellen's help, had created a separate intellectual property trust, irrevocable, and assigned all those assets to it. The trust had a unique triggering condition. Any sale of Tiny Truth Homes or its assets required not just the unanimous consent of all equity holders, but also the active, in-person, biometric verification of the beneficiary at the moment of title transfer. That beneficiary was me. My right thumbprint, taken on a digital pad at the trust's custodian bank, Pinnacle Trust, had to be scanned live, in real-time verification at the closing. Without it, the sale was void. The assets and the IP would revert entirely to the trust, which was then transferable to me as the last living trustee and sole beneficiary. Frank had arranged a dead man's switch, a biometric lock that no amount of forged signatures could override. Marcus could forge my name 100 times, but he could not forge the whorls of my thumb, the latent heat of my living skin on the sensor. He could not access the sale proceeds. And he had already signed the purchase agreement with Ashford Group, contingent on clean title delivery within 30 days. The buyer had placed a $100,000 earnest deposit in escrow. Marcus was racing against a deadline he didn't even fully understand. If he missed it, the deposit would be forfeited, Trident Capital would call his loan, and his entire house of cards would collapse on top of him. Ellen Locke wasn't just my lawyer. She became my ally. She connected me with a compliance officer at the escrow bank, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who specialized in real estate fraud and had a reputation for filing meticulous suspicious activity reports that led directly to indictments. Patricia reviewed my photos of the forged release, the offshore loan documents, and the notary fraud evidence. She opened a case with the FBI's white-collar division, specifically a field agent named Agent Chen, who had been tracking a string of fraudulent small business sales in the region. But to catch Marcus at the peak of his crime, to ensure the charges would stick solidly like a tenon joint, they needed him to walk into the closing meeting believing he had won, with me present as the supposedly subdued mother-in-law. I had to continue playing along, the docile widow in the guest room, until that room filled with signatures, and then refused to give him the one thing he couldn't steal, my thumbprint. Patricia gave me a small micro camera disguised as a pen, which I'd place in my purse at the closing, and a cellular jammer that would prevent Marcus from wiping his laptop remotely if things went sideways. I was now an asset in a federal investigation. Before I could walk into that room, though, I needed to know if a shred of genuine family feeling remained in either of them. I'd already learned, from a stray comment Jenna made, that Marcus had a habit of taking cayenne pepper capsules for a fad diet, a fact that stuck with me. A week before the scheduled closing, I staged a test. I had noticed the gel caps in the pantry, the bright red powder visible through the clear shells. Around midday, when I knew they were both home, I emptied one into a glass of water and drank it down. The sensation was immediate and volcanic. My face flushed beet red, my heart started hammering like a misaligned piston, and I lurched into the kitchen, crashing to the tile floor, gasping, clutching my chest. "Help! I can't breathe," I rasped, the performance terrifyingly real thanks to the pepper's chemical fire. I lay there, my cheek pressed to the cold grout, convulsing with the kind of panic that no actor can fully fake. Jenna was at the counter, holding a manila folder stamped with the Ashford Group logo. She glanced down at me, her expression flickering, but not in the way a daughter's should. There was no lunge, no scream for a phone, no kneeling to cradle my head. Her eyes darted to the folder first, then to the hallway where Marcus was pacing with his phone. Marcus strode in from the hall, phone pressed to his ear mid-sentence. "No, we'll have the title clear by Friday, I swear. I will personally deliver the escrow instructions." He saw me on the floor, slurring half-formed words, and he did not stop. He did not pause. He stepped right over my outstretched arm, his loafer brushing my sleeve, and kept walking toward the back door. Jenna hesitated for a half-second, looking from me to the folder in her hands, and then she followed him, calling, "Marcus, wait, the notary needs the second page." I lay on that cold floor for another 20 seconds, the pepper burn subsiding into a dull throb before I let myself sit up. The betrayal I'd documented on paper was now a physical thing, a cold, dead weight in my chest. I had given 30 years of labor, $100,000 of my own future, and every ounce of maternal love I had left, and I'd been discarded like a stripped screw. From that moment, I felt no loyalty, no love, only the perfect focus of a carpenter setting a final cut, the kind you don't test fit because you know it's true. Closing day arrived on a Thursday. I dressed in a plain navy blouse, looked deliberately tired, and let Jenna fuss over my hair with a brush that snagged. "You just need to sign one paper, Mom, and then everything will be settled," she said, her voice sugar-coated like the frosting on a poisoned cake. Marcus drove us to the title company's office, a glass and granite building downtown, chattering about a celebratory dinner at a steakhouse that had a 6-month waiting list. He even used the word family 3 times, each iteration ringing more hollow. I said nothing, staring out the window as we pulled into the parking garage. In my purse, I carried a copy of Frank's ledger page, the photos of the forgery, and the micro camera pen. Patricia Okonkwo had confirmed she was in a conference room 2 floors above us with Agent Chen and a local FBI task force coordinator, monitoring the live stream from my pen through a secure relay. The building's security team had been quietly briefed to disable the elevator on their signal, trapping anyone who tried to flee. We entered a sleek conference room with a table of polished walnut. The buyer's representative, a man named Mr. Tilden from Ashford Group, sat in a gray suit with a tie that cost more than my first piece of shop equipment. The title officer, a woman with reading glasses perched on her head, arranged a thick stack of documents at the head of the table. Marcus slid a thin folder toward me first, his smile stretching tight. Inside was a single page, a full release and settlement agreement, stating I would receive $6,000 in exchange for waiving all claims to Tiny Truth Homes, its assets, and any future profits. Beneath it was a line for my notarized signature, and beside that, a small space for a witness. I slipped my reading glasses on, the ones with the wire frames that make me look like a librarian, and scanned the text. Paragraph 3 contained a clause indemnifying Marcus and Jenna against any and all future legal claims. Paragraph 6 transferred the IP to Ashford Group directly, bypassing the trust entirely, which was impossible but showed how deep his arrogance ran. Marcus leaned back, his hands behind his head. "Go ahead, Mara. It's all taken care of." I looked up at him. I spoke clearly for the title officer, for the micro camera, and for the agents listening 2 floors above. "No, Marcus. This document is based on a lie. You forged my signature on the equity release. You hid an offshore loan through a shell company in Belize. You tried to sell my company, my designs, the home Frank drew for me, for $750,000 while handing me a $6,000 insult like I was a servant you could pay off with pocket change." His face paled in stages, the color draining from his temples to his jaw to his neck, as if a plug had been pulled somewhere deep inside. Jenna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but the gesture was stagey, too precise. "Mom, what are you doing?" I reached into my purse, pulled out the photographs, and spread them on the polished walnut in a neat fan. The forged signature, magnified to show the hesitation marks where the forger had paused to match my loops. The Belize Shell Company, the loan documents from Trident Capital. The fax cover sheet with its $750,000 figure. "This is what I'm doing." The door opened. Patricia Okonkwo stepped in, her heels precise on the marble, followed by Agent Chen and a second agent in a dark suit. Agent Chen said, "Marcus Byans, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Mr. Tilden recoiled, pulling his briefcase back as if it might be contaminated. The title officer froze, staring at the photographs. Marcus lunged for the folder, slipping on the edge of the rug, but Agent Chen blocked him with a forearm and had him in cuffs before he could reach the door. Jenna began to sob, a sound that was more frustration than sorrow, and a uniformed officer escorted her to a separate room for questioning. I stood up, walked calmly to the other side of the table, and pressed my right thumb to a small digital pad that the custodian bank had sent with the closing documents, a device about the size of a matchbox that glowed blue when it connected. The screen blinked green. Verified. The asset transfer failed exactly as Frank had designed. The earnest deposit in escrow was frozen pending a fraud investigation. The company, the blueprints, the model home, the patents, all of it snapped into the Frank Calder Intellectual Property Trust, and 30 minutes later, with Ellen Locke's signature, were legally conveyed to me, free of any lien, free of Marcus and Jenna and Trident Capital and any offshore shadow. In the aftermath, the legal machinery ground steadily. The FBI's forensic accountants traced every dollar Marcus had funneled through Haven Holdings, including a series of small transfers that looked like credit card payments for the German SUV and the wine fridge, purchases made with what was essentially stolen money. He had not only forged my signature, he had inflated the company's projected revenue to Ashford Group, presenting fake pre-order contracts from fictional buyers, a separate fraud that added a Securities and Exchange Commission interest to the case. The buyer, Ashford Group, furious at being dragged into the scheme and facing their own reputational damage, cooperated fully, providing their internal email chains that showed Marcus had been dodging verification requests for weeks. Jenna accepted a deal, pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact, and took 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, which she serves by filing paperwork at the county clerk's office under the supervision of a woman who doesn't tolerate tardiness. Marcus was convicted on 3 felony counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in a federal correctional institution, followed by 2 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay restitution of $200,000 to the lender and the buyer. But the truly satisfying part, the part Frank would have appreciated, was the creative sentence the judge approved. Because the fraud had used the tiny home brand's reputation and my personal trust as a weapon against me, the court allowed me to propose a public-facing penalty as part of the restitution agreement. Every Saturday for a full year, rain or shine, Marcus must report to our showroom lot on County Road 19. He wears a bright pink polo shirt with "Built on Deceit" across the back in block letters. He is court-ordered to complete 200 hours of manual work, specifically tightening every exposed bolt, screw, and fastener on the display models with a calibrated torque wrench, and then signing a logbook that is audited monthly by a probation officer. If he skips a day, uses the wrong torque spec, or so much as removes his shirt, he violates his supervised release and goes back to prison. I installed a webcam on the showroom light pole, pointed directly at the work area, and the feed is public. People drive by and honk. Some bring their kids to watch through the fence, a little lesson in accountability. I renamed the company Small Lies Tiny Homes. The first model, the one Frank drew by hand, now sits on a hill overlooking a creek, the exact parcel he'd marked on a survey with a little pencil star years ago. It's my home. The staircase folds away every morning with a soft click of the gravity hinge. The windows bring in southern light exactly as I calculated, heating the tile floor just enough that I can walk barefoot even in November. There's a small workshop out back where I still do finish work for custom orders, the smell of maple dust and varnish heavy in the air. Every unit we sell now comes with an owner's manual, a thick spiral-bound book with maintenance schedules and wall section drawings. And in the back of that manual, right before the warranty page, there's a QR code printed in the corner. When you scan it, the link opens the public docket of the federal fraud judgment, with Marcus's mugshot, the list of charges, and the sentencing memorandum. The manual text above it reads simply, "Transparency is the foundation of every true home." Hundreds of homeowners have seen it. Some write me letters saying they bought a small lie home specifically because of that code, because they want to do business with someone who refused to be broken by the people who were supposed to love her. I think about Frank constantly. He was the quiet architect, the man who sketched roof lines at midnight and never raised his voice. But he built the most important structure of all, a door I could walk through when the vultures closed in, a biometric lock that turned on my identity alone. I was just a carpenter who learned to read the grain. And when the wood showed its hidden rot, its checks and splits and wormholes disguised by cheap veneer, I knew exactly where to cut. I cut deep, I cut true, and the whole rotten structure fell apart. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe that integrity leaves a paper trail no fraud can erase, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I'll see you in the next story.